On the agenda tonight, we're following on from last night's video that I did on Bay City Rollers to cover the history, the background, but also to explore how they managed to take home 0.006% each from every record sale they made. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus, and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So we're going to be taking a slightly different angle with tonight's analysis, because I did say last night that I would cover the history in another video, but I think there's some really important points to bring up about the contracts. Bay City Rollers in particular were one of those bands that were massively successful but didn't make any money. And when I say they didn't make any money, it's pretty much literally that. As I said, the percentage at the beginning of the video, it is unbelievable how little they did take home from 120 million, at least, album sales throughout their careers. So jumping straight into it, to give you guys a little bit of the background, in 2007, 6 former members of the band sued Arista Records, which is now part of Sony, and those members were the original, the classic lineup, and Duncan as well. And whilst they started this case against Arista Records, previous members who were in the band as well filed complaints for not being included in that court case, but the court case went ahead because those complaints were denied by the courts. And anyway, it started in 2007, and as with everything with the court system, it eventually got sorted out in 2016, and by that time it was judged that because Arista Records continually promised to give the band their royalties, they had an out-of-court settlement, and that was around $70,000 for each of the members. So if I bring back the figures that I mentioned at the beginning of the video of at least 120 million albums sold, we can start to get an idea of the revenue that that would have created. Here on iTunes, you can buy an album for £11.99, £9.99 or £7.99. It all depends on the album, but if we take that middle figure of £9.99 and add 1 pence to it to make it easier for the calculations going forward, if we're looking at £10 an album and then we times 120 million by 10, we end up with 1.2 billion. Something to mention about that figure of 1.2 billion pounds. If you're wondering what that is in US dollars, it's 1.45 billion US dollars. But this number that we've got was achieved purely by album sales. We're not talking about tours, selling tickets for those, merchandise. When the court case was over and they settled, each member got £70,000, and this does work out at 0.006% of every album that they sold. And you've got to then question, when they're signing a contract, do you think they would have been happy signing that back in the mid-70s, considering we are the band, we are the faces on front of the albums, and the fans are buying the albums because of us. Without them, the record label would have nothing. So if the record label said, we're going to offer you 0.006%, they wouldn't have signed that contract. And especially if they'd mentioned that in 1975, you're going to get £70,000 in 2016. But unfortunately, it's something that happens all the time, all across the music industry, still does as well. And everybody that does watch this channel a lot will know that I'm very much an independent artist myself, and I push that angle for other artists and other bands. If you can stay independent, it is so much better for you in the long run to just own everything about yourself and about your music. But unfortunately, I think still nowadays, somehow, the general public, and especially the younger generation, if they were offered a record deal, they see that as something that is desirable and they want to sign to get a record deal. I think the problem is at the moment, especially with the younger generation, is they confuse fame with success. And they think that if you sign a record deal, then you're going to be famous you're not necessarily going to be successful. And when I say successful, I'm talking about an artist's point of view of being successful, where you try and sell enough of your product in order to do it full time. And I'm not talking about fame, because fame doesn't get you anything. Once you get recognized on the street, that person has not written you a check and put it into your bank account. They just know your face. You don't earn any money every day for people recognizing you, but you do earn money every day if you can sell your product. And your product, your music, or whatever you do artistically is successful. So from my view as an independent artist myself, the younger generation who might watch all of the talent shows on TV are seduced by the fame element and don't yet understand the business side of it, that you've got to sell your product, you've got to have enough of a profit margin to then buy in more product and then sell that and still be left with enough profit to live day to day. And that is how you make a living with whatever your art form is, or whatever it is that you produce in your life, or your skills that you've worked on and you've studied. You've got the older generation who have listened to bands back in the 60s and the 70s, and that's how it was done. You had to sign a record deal in order to get known, in order to sell millions of records, but they didn't find out how much the band members actually made, because it was all the fame. Again, they're seeing these faces up on the billboards and they're idols of the teenagers of that time, but the teenagers didn't realize that guys like this weren't getting paid anything. It was all just expenses being paid by the record label. As soon as they leave that record label, they're now exactly the same as everybody else. It's just that now they get recognized. So I think there is this middle generation that I think I'm part of, where we are old enough to see how people got done out of so much money in the 60s and the 70s, the 80s, the 90s with record deals that they did sign, but still young enough to have seen the impact of the internet on the music industry. And I was around before the internet was, so I got to see it firsthand, how things improved, and to the point where now in 2020, you can do everything yourself. You can be your own marketing team. You can have your own website. You can sell your product online. You can send out your CDs. And I do all of these things myself, but it's because of having the best of both worlds from a knowledge perspective, and also being able to see that fame doesn't get you a salary every single month. The reason that I do push the independent angle on this channel is because now the younger generation's parents are my age. So they've had the advantage of seeing the impact of the internet on the industry and hearing these horror stories of bands signing contracts. So it means that the parents are now setting up websites, doing everything independently, and are effectively managing their children to make sure that they can do this for a living in the future. And the way that the record labels ripped off so many bands, the amount of money they were making was insane. As I've mentioned, £1.2 billion. So when you have a look at the cost of renting a venue and the cost of cutting a record, getting a producer, all of these different things cost nowhere near £1.2 billion. It's important as well to look at it from these guys' perspective, because when they were 20, 21 years of age, and I'm referring to Alan and Derek Longmire here, founding members of the band, they signed their first record deal. And if they hadn't have done that, they probably would still be studying, maybe at university, but they were locked into that first contract really early on. And also, from their point of view, they're traveling the world, getting flown here, there, and everywhere. They're recording albums, recording videos for singles. They're on TV, getting interviewed, doing performances. It's a bubble of activity. And every day they're just doing whatever is on the agenda for that day. They're being told where to go and what to do. At no point are the band sitting down and saying to the record label, how much are we selling an album for? What are the margins for that? What is pure profit? How much does it cost per album to make? And the printing, the distribution. At no point would any of these guys have asked that of the record label, because they're in this bubble of activity and they've got no idea on the financial side of what's going on, but also more often than not, what they have signed in the contract. There is the saying, if you want a job done properly, do it yourself. And that applies to every walk of life, because in the music industry, if you've just signed a contract with a record label, you are now relying on the record label's employees to pitch the album at the right price to make enough profit to then continue to release music. And I assure you that some people that work at record labels can't do the maths, they can't work it out. So they will be selling albums for less than it costs to make them in the first place. So there is this assumption from the band that we are being so successful and we're so busy that we must be making money, without actually checking if they are making money. All they would have experienced is everything being paid for and all of their expenses being paid. They're not getting a regular payment into their bank account every month based on the sales for that month. So I think that if you do stay independent, not only do you retain the rights to everything that you've written in the past and will write in the future, but it also teaches you invaluable lessons about business and how you have to price things in order to make a profit and to make it financially viable to sell your art, it doesn't matter what it is, in such a way that you can keep doing it, that once you make a sale, that can then fund the next part of your career and your artistry to make something else, and then keep that whole business model rolling forward, because at no point are you ever at a loss and having to make up money. But with all that said, let's get into the history of the band. It all started at school with Alan and Derek, who I mentioned earlier, setting up their band after school, getting out there gigging. And it was one of those bands who did start up as every other band does. It wasn't one of these commercialized reply to an advert kind of bands, which I think a lot of people assume it was along those lines. But these guys were a band already, and the name they came up with by throwing a dart at a map of the USA, and the first place it landed was Arkansas, and they thought they didn't like that name, so then they threw it again and it landed on Bay City in Michigan. They signed their first record deal in the early 70s with Bell Records, and in 1971 they released Keep On Dancing, and this was a huge hit in the UK. It got to number 9 in the charts, and that was a cover of the Gentry's song. They also appeared on Top of the Pops, so got that exposure on TV, but unfortunately the follow-up singles didn't chart. And this was around the same time as well that Eric Faulkner joined on guitar. So getting into mid to late 1973, this is where things started to take off. But the vocalist at that time, Gordon "Nobby" Clark, he quit the band because he wasn't happy with the musical direction, and Les McKeown stepped in. Interestingly, the song Remember Sha La 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 in 1974, really early on, started to shoot up the charts, and that had Gordon's vocals on there. It was the recording that he made, but he had left the band, and Stuart "Woody" Wood also joined to then complete the classic lineup. So after this spike in popularity and the success of Remember Sha La La La, they released Shang-a-Lang, which we looked at yesterday, and that got to number 2 in the UK charts, a massive hit. And then Summer Love Sensation got to number 3 in the charts here, and then All of Me Loves All of You got to number 4 in the charts. So their singles were just hitting that top 10 of the charts consistently. This all culminated in Roller Mania, which was compared with Beatlemania because everyone was going crazy, and they also had a 20-week run of a TV series here in the UK. In 1975, they had massive success. They released a cover of Bye Bye Baby. That got to number 1 in the UK charts, stayed there for 6 weeks. They then followed that up with Give a Little Love. That went to number 1 as well. In the same year, they released 3 albums, Once Upon a Star, Bay City Rollers, and Wouldn't You Like It. They were also launched at this time in North America as well. They went to number 1 in the charts with Saturday Night, and interestingly, that had been released in the UK years earlier and didn't chart at all. Their album, Bay City Rollers, got to number 1 in the charts. Money Honey got to number 9 in the US charts as well. It got to number 1 in Canada. And to give you an idea of their success in Canada, in 1976, when they released Rock and Roll Love Letter, that removed their previous album from the #1 spot. So they were dominating the album charts in Canada at that time. They were also huge in Australia. In 1976, they released Dedication and also had huge success with their cover of I Only Want to Be With You, which got to #12 in the US charts. They had some personnel changes around this time, but also wanted to change the sound of the band to sound more sophisticated. So to that end, they got David Bowie's producer involved, and in 1977 released It's a Game. In 1978 is when Les left the band and Duncan Forer, who I mentioned earlier in that court case, joined. In 1979, they released Elevator. In 1980, they released Vox. And in 1981, they released Ricochet. And at this point, the Arista record contract had run out, so they stopped touring late 1981. But that final album that I mentioned in 1981, called Ricochet, has been critically acclaimed and really referred to as a masterpiece of pop rock. So after this time, each of the band members had their own versions of Bay City Rollers, and it is something, unfortunately, that more recently has caused a bit of friction between the band members. For example, Les and Stuart, because Stuart is still using the Bay City Rollers band name, even though it's just him, and then he's got other people who are playing who weren't part of that original lineup, and it's something that I think Les doesn't agree with totally, because people might go along thinking that it's going to be the surviving members. Sadly, Alan passed away in 2018, but having the remaining members maybe playing together, but then turning up and it just being Stuart there with a whole new band. So thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Keep those suggestions coming in the comments below for other artists and bands to analyze musically in the future. But I will see you guys at the next one. Rock!